bought the perfect car. Or so I thought. Little did I know how much work the '69 Camaro was going to be. It was supposed to be an easy project car for my mom to fulfill her lifelong dream of owning a classic Camaro. And it turned out to be one of the most challenging endeavors I've ever done. You can see how much rust this thing had. It turned out that someone welded new panels to a rotted out foundation. So begins major deconstruction. I started with taking off all sheet metal to see how bad it really was. The inner structure, roof frame, rockers, and trunk floor were pretty bad. I have a feeling this was a vinyl top car. I braced up the floor and roof support to the dash frame, and I cut off the entire inner side structure. The old package tray was removed and a new one was fitted with some Cleco holders so I could adjust and make some marks. These will serve as a baseline for me to line up the new inner structure with. Here I'm test fitting the new inner structure I bought from Dynacorn. I'll be lining up most of the panels to the new inner structure pieces so that fitment at this point doesn't need to be perfect. I'll be adjusting when I fit the body panels. I hung the driver's side quarter panel to check my work and see if anything needs to be adjusted before I continue. To remove the trunk floor, I first cut out the section between the frame rails so I can sit inside and drill out the spot welds easier. And there were a lot. Once I got the spot welds drilled out, I used an air hammer to pop the rest of the pieces off. Then I started preparing the new trunk pan to go in. This was just a ton of grinding and cleaning up the old metal. The frame rails were in decent shape, so they just got cleaned up and sprayed with some rust converter. Test fitting the trunk pan, I just needed to hammer out the curves where it touches the wheel wells a bit. Once I was happy with the fit, I drilled some holes and spot welded it in. I got the inner rear valence in place and welded it to the frame rails and trunk floor. Time to start on the other side. I cut the inner structure out in several pieces just to make it easier to carry out of my garage. Time to fit the new inner structure. Who needs a frame machine when you got ratchet straps? Got it all fitted as close as I could. I used sheet metal screws and a few tack welds to hold it in place. I need to check to see if my body panels and my glass line up before I weld it in fully. After a whole lot of test fitting, I'm finally installing the passenger quarter panel once and for all. Finally starting to look like a car again. Here I'm using the rear glass to line up my roof panel before I get it welded in permanently. Cleaned up the roof structure and sprayed on some weld-through primer so I can finally install the roof. The driver's side door to quarter panel gap is a little bit tight, but otherwise it's very close. Getting the roof panel on feels like a big accomplishment now. At this point, every speck of rust has been removed, and this is now a new car. Fitting up the drip rail and the roof line, I use a lot of clamps. And the only reason I didn't use any more is because I didn't have any. They're the key to keeping the panel in place while welding it in. I reinstalled the front subframe so I could attach the rest of the body panels and see how everything fits. It looks great. Sadly, it's short-lived. I need to take it apart so I can finish up on the firewall and finish welding up some areas on the floor pans and the subframe connectors. This engine is a 5.3 LM7 or truck motor. Made it to a 4L60 transmission. It's got a Holley MSD Atomic EFI, which is a bit dated at this point, but it's what it is. Along with headers, but it's otherwise untouched stock 5.3. Plan is for now to get a good foundation to build on. The only thing it's getting is a Vortec V3 supercharger, but otherwise I got no other plans for this engine. The firewall was pretty hacked up and had a lot of holes from mounting points and whatever else. I made a rough cutout for cleaning up the factory airbox hole and welded in a new thicker plate. I'll be mounting my AC evaporator as well as a fuel regulator and maybe a few other things, so I wanted it to be a little stronger than factory. The subframe was fitted previously with a Smith Racecraft rack and pinion kit, which used a manual rack based on the Ford Pinto. It was a decent enough kit, but besides needing power steering for my mom, the steering arms with that kit hit the lower control arms, causing the whole car to have a super wide turning radius. My solution was to fit a cheap C4 Corvette steering rack, which shares the same dimensions as the old rack. The only problem though is that it is much larger, requiring me to make a lot more space in the subframe crossmember. I reinforced the area I cut out with some 18 gauge steel, layered up with several more pieces to make it nice and strong. Once I made enough room to run my steering linkage through the crossmember, I made a simple bracket out of a 1/4 inch steel to mount the rack to. Then I repurposed the old Smith Racecraft part by making a bracket to mount the right side of the steering rack. The steering rack is mounted nice and solid and steers the wheels great, but I discovered a big problem. The rack sits too low and is at high risk of hitting the lower control arm during full suspension travel. Since I do not have any more space to move the rack up, I decided it'd be best to put the subframe aside and get a fully engineered one. So while my new subframe from G-Comp is being made, I'll be moving on to other parts of the car. This car will be seeing boost, so I want to have Hydro Boost power brakes. And since most of these kits run about $1,000, I wanted to try and make my own work. A lot of them are based on the same part, which can be found in a 90s Astrovan. So for less than $150, I bought this booster and began fitting it up to my stock pedal. Now that the metal work on the firewall is done, I can move on to my AC kit, wiring harness, and gauges. I need to roughly assemble my dash so I can plan out how I want to run my wiring harness and dash components. I'll be installing a set of analog style Dakota gauges that will hopefully strike a nice balance between classic and modern. I'll be using GPS for speed, so no need to run a mechanical speedometer either. Well, it has come a long way, but there is still so much left to do. Thanks for watching.